Let's talk about all of this with Steve Gill. He's a former advisor to the Clinton and Bush administrations. Very good afternoon to you.
Hey, ladies. And by the way, Claire is right. It may devolve into, civil unrest, except y'all are so polite. I don't know that the Brits could ever engage in civil unrest. That's kind of the American thing.
Yeah, okay. Excuse me, would you mind awfully getting your gun? Yeah, exactly. Well, I tell you what, we can.
And let's go have tea together at 4.
Yes. With some Battenberg cake. I'm telling you, we're getting ruder. We're getting ruder. I'm all in favour of us being a bit more. I've always had this thing. I had 2 years at school in America. I'm just convinced I've got an American personality in terms of like, I want it now, I want it how I want it, and I'm willing to stay it out. Steve, I'm feeling you and I are going to come to verbal blows today, though, because I've always said ahead of Donald Trump's election, I'd vote for him on balance, but I was really happy with his on international affairs where he was standing on Israel, but I thought it was a disaster on Ukraine. But I had a little bit of hope that he might see sense, or he was just lying about it ahead of the election. But no, as far as he's concerned, Zelensky, the democratically elected president of a country that's been invaded, is a dictator and the man in the wrong. And Putin, who is the murderous, evil, tyrannical dictator who's invaded a democratic country, is the guy in the right and who he trusts and he wants to take the side of. Why does he take the side of Putin, as America did in 2 votes at the United Nations yesterday? Why does he take the side of a dictator over the side of a democratically elected president in Ukraine?
Well, just because you are agreeing with truth and reality with President Putin does not mean that you're a Russian propagandist or that you're taking the side of evil. And keep in mind, if Putin and Trump are standing on a street corner in London and it's pouring down rain and Putin says, wow, it's raining hard, and Trump says, yes, it is, just because you're agreeing about truth does not mean that you're a Russian propagandist.
What was the truth that Putin stated that Trump agrees with?
Well, first of all, you know that 10 years ago, it was Ukrainian troops that were bombing and killing people in Donbass, in Donetsk and Luhansk. Even CNN was covering it 10 years ago, and that is part of what caused this.
No, it was Ukrainian troops defending, at their government's behest, their own territory from Russian incursions.
No, they were killing Ukrainians in Donbass, in Donetsk and Luhansk. I will send you the clip from CNN 10 years ago. That's what was happening. And then keep in mind that the whole incursion started right after the red line of we will not expand NATO towards Russia that we promised, that Western Europe promised. And actually, Kamala Harris went to Ukraine and said, we're coming, we're putting Ukraine into NATO. That's what precipitated the invasion.
That's not what precipitated the invasion. Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin made it very clear in an essay that he himself penned that he'd not believed that Ukraine was an independent, sovereign state. By the way, the Americans, like the British, had actually signed a treaty with Ukraine and Russia to guarantee the borders of Ukraine. And Ukraine was never going to be allowed to join NATO. There's no way that Turkey would have agreed to it anyway. It wasn't actually on the cards at that time. But they're still promising.
But you still have those in the West.
But hold on a minute. The argument that Trump gives is like, well, Russia was provoked. It's not that they felt under threat. They were provoked by talking about expanding NATO. Well, hold on a minute. He's talking about NATO members in Europe spending. Basically, he's suggested double what they're paying now on their military and building up their own military and their own defences. So hold on a minute. So would that not be another provocation to Vladimir Putin? Would that not basically say, why don't you invade Estonia? Why don't you invade Latvia? Why don't you invade Poland? Why is one a provocation and the other not?
Well, it's because if one case you are a defensive NATO, which is what it's supposed to be, and the other is you're doing offensive
No, NATO has never committed. No, that's simply not true. NATO is only a defensive organisation. It has never gone to war with anyone.
Well, except you're supplying missiles, rockets, and bullets that are being fired.
NATO isn't supplying them. NATO members are supplying them.
Right. Okay, so that's
not the same thing, though, is it?
It depends on if you're on the receiving end of that missile or that bomb as a civilian in eastern Ukraine.
I'm sorry. NATO member America went to war in Korea and in Vietnam, but it didn't mean that NATO was at war in Korea and Vietnam, did it?
No, but NATO is supplying the weapons that have been used to kill innocent civilians.
No, NATO is not supplying. NATO doesn't have. No, NATO wasn't. Individual members. I'm sorry. Putin was not provoked into invading Ukraine. That is a Kremlin talking point. I think it is embarrassing that your president and people as esteemed and respected as you are making this case. And I don't understand why you're making it, because it can't be based on anything other than you think that Putin is a justified, what he's done is justified. Invading an independent sovereign nation state cannot be justified.
Nor can Ukraine killing innocent civilians in Luhansk and Donetsk for 10 years with nobody saying anything.
No, it was in the news. Well, you just said it was. You said no one said anything. You said it, but it was on CNN. I'm sorry, it was in the news. Russian incursions to basically seize and completely take over and control by other ways the eastern industrial zone of Ukraine was met with. There was basically civil war and violent unrest, and Ukrainian soldiers were sent in. The idea that remotely justifies what Vladimir Putin did in February 2022 is frankly ludicrous.
Well, again, I think if you're in Luhansk and Donetsk and Donbass, and for 10 years you've been bombed by your own country, that is why the people there voted by referendum to join Russia and voted to send their own representatives. And again, you're seeing Luhansk and Donetsk and those areas rebuilt.
This is just utter abject nonsense. It really is. Let's move on, Steve. How will we get to peace? The president says that we could. President Donald Trump says that he believes that there could be peace within weeks, and he's talking about this mineral deal. When the money was given, and basically to pay back America for all the billions they've spent on helping Ukraine. That money wasn't given as a loan, wasn't given as a sort of, well, we'll get something back from you. That was money that was given because it was in the interest of Ukraine, the interest of Europe, and the interest of the Western world, including the US, to stop Vladimir Putin in his tracks. So why does he think that he has a right to those mineral rights?
I think you have to go back to the tape of when you had President Zelensky saying, when he was asking for the money, these are loans, these are grants, indicating that it would be paid back. And now he's saying, nope, we're not paying anything back. So are you going to believe Zelensky today or back?
No, loans you pay back, grants you don't pay back.
He said loans in the tapes.
Okay, well, some of them were loans in Britain's case, but that's when Congress voted on these, I'm pretty sure they didn't think they were loans.
Well, I'm not sure that they voted with much detail in it. And by the way, what about the money that's been stolen? I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars have, quote, disappeared. Zelensky has fired dozens of his top officials for corruption. He himself can't account for at least $100 billion in U.S. aid. This was one of the most corrupt countries in the world before this conflict.
Yeah, as all ex-Soviet Union countries, all ex-Soviet countries are, because nothing functions without corruption under the Soviet bloc. That's how people live. No one's sensible is claiming Zelensky is an angel or that his regime is an angel or not. Life isn't good or bad. It's the lesser or worse of two evils. People living under democracy in Ukraine, having voted for that man to be their leader in 2019, is different from people living under a murderous dictator who blatantly, openly, callously murders anyone who stands against him in an election. I don't think that this is a difficult battle to decide who's in the right and who's in the wrong and who we should back in the West.
Well, we see that people are voting with their feet in Ukraine. The BBC and others have reported that over 1 million military-age men have fled Ukraine rather than fight for their country. I think they're showing a vote in a democratic way.
I hate to tell you
as you're seeing young men dragged out of their cars and sent to the front lines to their death. That's a murderous regime.
I hate to tell you, that's exactly what America did in the Vietnam War, exactly what Britain did in the Second World War. When you have conscription to save your country, yes, lots of men don't want to fight that war, we can understand. But that's it. I mean, by the way, your president didn't have that worry because he's pretended to have a foot injury and stayed in college and didn't actually bother fighting. Happy to send other men to war. I'm sorry.
Well, but wait a minute. Now, Keir Starmer and the Western Europeans who are saying we want to keep this war going, Keir Starmer might send peacekeepers, but they need to start going to the front lines if they think Ukraine is that important. Why aren't Brits?
Well, no,
Why aren't French? Why aren't Germans dying?
Because Ukraine said we don't need you to spill your blood. We need your money and your equipment, and we will spill our blood. By the way, I hate to tell you, there was a poll a couple of years ago after the invasion of Ukraine, and 40% of young Americans, or 40% of Americans overall, said they would not fight for their country. So I hate to tell you, in the event that you were ever invaded in your country, you'd be doing exactly the same to conscript those young men to save your country.
Julia, we've got enough guns in each of our homes that nobody's going to invade us. But more importantly, when you look at this conflict, it has been lost. It's been being lost. And you have the head of NATO acknowledging...
Russia is one of the hugest military mights in the world, and they've only managed to take sort of less than 20% of Ukrainian territory in 3 years, for goodness sake, in 3 years.
I am glad you point that out, because what we're hearing today is that if we don't start Russia where it is, it will invade all of Europe. So which is it? Do they have this powerful military that's going to invade all of Europe? Or not?
Well, you know, they're going to go back. They're going to rebuild but also they've been told, you know, we're not that bothered. We're willing to give up other countries' sovereign territory. Do you believe for a moment, because I don't anymore, that America would come to the aid of a NATO country that was invaded? If it was one of the Baltic states, if it was Poland, if it was another state in Europe that was invaded by Russia? Because I tell you what, those states, they're spending their high percentage of GDP on their military might. Finland, for goodness sake, Finland has got a reserve force of 250,000 people. That's how scared they are of a Russian invasion. All those countries know what it's like to live under Russia. They know how bad it is, and that's why they're defending themselves. Would America be willing to defend them? Would Vladimir Putin be able to go into those countries and Donald Trump would say, well, it's Europe's problem. I'll do a deal with my mate Vlad?
Isn't it interesting that none of those NATO countries were putting in the financial resources that they had promised until Donald Trump said, well, maybe we'll pull out.
I believe they were, actually. I believe those countries I named actually were.
Now, most of the NATO countries are at about 1.3.
Most weren't, but I believe those countries were. And the reason they were is they know the reality.
Well, but the rest of the countries, France, Germany, they are well under that, and they have only expanded their military expenditures in the last couple of years when they saw Trump was coming in, and that the U.S. gravy train would come to an end.
And I agree. I agreed with Trump in his first term when he called them out on this. I completely agreed. I don't see why American taxpayers should be funding European security. I've got no problem with that. Would Donald Trump, as President of the United States, come to the aid of a NATO country that was invaded by Putin?
I think he absolutely would. And I don't think that it would happen because Putin believes that Trump would do that.
OK, let me just tell you also, Prime Minister here, Keir Starmer, is going to be meeting with your president on Thursday in the White House. He's making a statement in the House of Commons in about 10 minutes' time. And he's expected to use that statement to say that the British government will increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. It's currently at 2.3%. Some of that is, you know, veterans' pensions. Quite a lot of that is our nuclear deterrent, obviously. So that means that's money that I'm a big fan of the nuclear deterrent, but that's money that can't be spent on conventional forces. Your president has asked us to be spending 5%. Not that America spends 5% of GDP, but we're talking about a target. We don't know when that will actually be by. But does that touch the sides of the needs of European countries to defend themselves?
I think the European countries should be better prepared to defend themselves. And keep in mind that NATO funding, over half of it comes from the U.S. So, again, the U.S. is paying more than its fair share, despite whether that percentage of GDP is right, while a lot of those countries are still in the 1.3% range and need to be increasing it. Now, to be fair, the Germans are saying, let's make it real clear here. You are asking us to remilitarize. You're asking us, after 2 world wars in the last century, you really want us to increase our military. So we need to be careful what we ask as we look going forward.
Yeah, indeed. Look, let's end on a note of agreement, because I know we will agree on this. Elon Musk, that brilliant email that he sent out as part of the Department of Government Efficiency to all government employees, basically saying, by midnight on Monday, I want you to reply telling us what you've done in the last week. Account for what you've actually got done. 5 bullet points, please. No classified information. A lot of government departments said, FBI and others, no, don't answer that. And basically, if you don't reply by Monday midnight, you were considered to have resigned. People up in arms about it, absolutely outraged, the unions outraged, lots of their managers outraged. Elon Musk doubled down on this. Donald Trump in the press conference yesterday completely backed Elon Musk. Are you aware, have we actually seen more replies? And are people going to lose their jobs if they don't reply and say what they've actually sodding well done last week?
It's kind of crazy. Again, what is the danger of asking your employees, so what'd you do last week? If you're in sales, you fill out sales reports weekly. I was a lawyer by background. We filled out little timesheets so we could bill clients.
Yeah, you get paid per hour.
Increments.
Yeah.
So again, asking this is also exposing, like we're finding in our Social Security with our pensioners, where you've got 150-year-old people who've been receiving Social Security payments. They aren't real. And we know that a lot of these employees aren't real. So if you don't submit your what did I do last week, that might be a first step towards realizing you didn't do anything, which means maybe your job's unnecessary, or you're not real and we're going to claw back the money we've been paying.
Well, I mean, again, you talk about corruption in Ukraine. Seems to be got a bit of a problem in America. I'm glad to see you getting on top of it. I'd love to see us do this here. I really would. Steve Gill, nice to end on a note of agreement. I think you're horribly wrong on Ukraine. Former advisor to Clinton and Bush administrations. Quick word from Claire Pearsall.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with him. Absolutely not on Ukraine. But I do with Doge and the emails. I think that it'd be great, wouldn't it, to do that in this country?
Absolutely.
See the meltdown.
Honestly, but not even the public sector only. Private sector as well. Absolutely all over. Right, we're going to take a quick break. Up next.